This video is sponsored by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for building a professional online presence that helps you run your business. More on them at the end of the video. I do sure love me some plot twists. Not all games are brave enough to have them because there's not much worse than a stupid or misguided plot twist, but I can attribute some of my most memorable experiences playing video games to being dumbfounded at some kind of exciting revelation or reveal. Games have tried for decades to elicit some kind of shocked reaction from the player, and when this hasn't been offensive and tone deaf, it's been exciting to see just what games will do to rock the player's expectations. I've been around for a while now. I like to think my expectations are fairly managed. But you'd be surprised how much that doesn't matter. Long-time viewers of this channel will know that I've talked about this topic before, but you'd have to be a really long-time viewer since that was nearly 8 years ago. I'd say that's a lengthy enough period to look back on the many games that have come out in that period or others that I've played since 2012, which is why I'll be deliberately avoiding any moments that were a part of that original video. Not that that's going to be a problem, because there's so many shocking moments all throughout gaming history, it's just a case of picking some of the best from what I have left. I am spoiled for choice. It's up for debate whether or not shocking moments are made better by making them a sudden reveal with no build-up, or gradually dropping hints to the eventual moment so that it has a more powerful impact. Either way, shocking moments kind of need to be within the realm of believability and not be the stupidest thing you've ever seen in your entire life. My girlfriend was bored. Sometimes it's the quietest games that have the most to say. That might just be what artsy games do, since they're hardly going to regale you with every minute detail of their world, but may have a trick or two up their sleeve to leave you reeling. Few games are as unassuming as Limbo, the bleak tone hinting at some kind of greater meaning, but it's hard to read too much into it when the giant spider is trying to put holes in you. It's a little distracting. The ending is beautiful, but cryptically confusing, with a lot left up to the imagination, so instead of dwelling too much on that and trying to work out what's going on, how about Inside, the spiritual successor with similar amounts of quiet reflection in a fascinating world with one key difference? The ending is fucking insane! Most of your time in this game is spent infiltrating a large factory where scientists are conducting mind control experiments, and through all of the underwater sections and sound wave rooms, it all boils down to one room with observers surrounding a large chamber, and I'm sure they were having lots of fun watching this massive arms and legs. But that was before your playable boy was absorbed into it, and suddenly you're smashing through walls and ceilings and turning science men into a nasty stain, and can we just back up a little bit? The ending to Inside is so different to the rest of the game that it can't help but feel like anything but massive tonal dissonance, but it's also a huge release of all that tension that the game was building across the whole adventure. It's as equally abrupt as Limbo's ending, but whereas that game goes for a quiet reverence over its own ambiguity, Inside is all like, fuck that noise, I'm going on a rampage! If you thought this game was going to end like this, you're a barefaced liar. No matter how many times I come across them, fights that you can never win always surprise me. It's a trope that you don't see all that often, if just because I think a lot of people get annoyed by being manipulated like this, but that's kind of what this video is all about, and I feel like I should talk about them. Especially when they're used as well as in Halo Reach. You can really tell that Bungie were moving on to other things after Halo Reach. I wouldn't quite call them bigger and better things given where they've gone since, but prior knowledge of what the company would end up doing allowed Bungie the perfect opportunity to write a very useful chapter in Halo's story. Reach is a prequel that attempts to fill in some unseen gaps in the lore by following Noble Team, a group of elite super soldiers who play pivotal roles in the war against the Covenant. Over the course of the game, you grow to appreciate the individual characters that make up the team and how they work so well within the team dynamic. Character work that makes their eventual deaths all the more devastating. Reach's prequel status gives it a similar role to the film Rogue One, where none of these characters are in any of the future chronology, and you can safely assume that none of them will leave this game alive. And yeah, they don't, but not in the way I expected. Noble Team's final act in this game is to ensure that a ship full of civilians can escape the Covenant, which sounds fairly basic, but every member dies along the way, all doing their part to secure the ship's safety. Every member but your own playable character dies before the credits roll, so you're left to use your imagination to think that Noble 6 met his end fighting off all of these aliens. It's only after the credits that Halo Reach hits the nail on the head by making you play through Noble 6's last stand, with your only objective being survive. Your ammo and health runs low with no resupplies, and yet the aliens just keep coming as you're overrun and meet your end like a true hero. Halo Reach didn't need to show this, but it did anyway, and I can't say I've seen many games have the guts to put you in control of such a powerful moment. Sometimes imagination can only get you so far. Let's face it, kids are easily surprised. Not that you can blame them, since they're seeing the world for the first time and they haven't had enough experience to get bored of it, but you can do more with less in a game aimed for a younger demographic. That is, if you want a plot twist at all, because the majority of Pokemon games are fairly straightforward path to the finish, where there might be a moment or two where the bad guy's plan doesn't quite go how they were expecting it to, but quite often you can tell that Game Freak haven't spent too long on the story. And honestly, that's a shame, since Pokemon at its storytelling best has done some incredible things, and I will always remember how I felt when I found out that Gen 1's Elite Four actually had 5 members. You guys seem to think that Game Freak have only just started lying, but these bozos have been telling lies since the very beginning. But what a brilliant lie to tell! Keeping the champion a secret is one way of providing the player with a final test after they assume that Lance's powerful dragons are the endgame, but Gen 1 hits it out of the park by revealing that your rival stands before you as the last challenge you need to overcome to be the strongest trainer in the land. He's one of the only trainers you fought multiple times throughout your adventure, so it makes a lot of sense for him to eventually assume this position, but it's the best ending Game Freak could have possibly come up with in order to make fighting the champion a personal experience. Maybe you'd think that having the best trainer in the region be someone who you've defeated more than a few times in the build-up to this moment would dilute him as a threat, but he's got the most balanced team in the game and will ask a lot from you in order to best him, so that's not a problem. We've had some exciting battles with champions in later games, but none have been quite as surprising as this, with so much personal stake for the player. Imagine if you've beaten your rival in every previous battle, but you're lost here. Losing isn't an option anymore. Can a moment still be shocking if everyone knows about it? You'd think no, because as soon as an event enters popular culture, it loses its power to surprise, but there also has to be a reason why it entered pop culture in the first place. Five Nights at Freddy's may have become distorted by overexposure, but it only gained massive popularity because the first game was so good. To dismiss something out of hand because its popularity has ascended beyond the popular thing would deprive me a chance to talk about the latest popular thing on everyone's minds right now, and while the Final Fantasy VII Remake has been released episodically, it hasn't yet touched the big important spoiler from the original. But hey, it's a remake! Who's to say that Aerith needs to die? I suppose it depends how closely the remake wants to follow the original, but Aerith's death in the original Final Fantasy VII is one of the most iconic, shocking moments in the history of video games. So many people played this game and had their expectations smashed by a tall boy with a long sword abruptly stabbing Aerith through the back, and completely changing the course of this game by permanently removing a lovable character from your party and the roster as a whole. Looking back on her death scene, the aftermath especially is a little too comical, with the blocky graphics limiting the amount of emotion that can be conveyed outside of cutscenes, but the cutscenes themselves were devastating to see for the first time. Decades of memes and parodies may have diminished the shock value, but at the time, important characters weren't just killed by some guy falling out the sky. You can't say you saw this one coming. You approach zombie survival games with certain expectations. Generally, every halfway decent character is at the very least likely to die, so it's best not to get too attached to them since you'll just be setting yourself up for an emotional death scene. Some games are hard to be emotionally distant to than others though, as is evident to anyone who has played 15 minutes of The Last of Us, and it's typically the story-driven zombie games that focus less on landing sick headshots and more on the human connections that are shattered by the inconvenience of being infected with a zombie virus. The Last of Us is great and all, but if you want a zombie game with a side of horrifying distress, Telltale's The Walking Dead is some deeply depressing shit. Not quite as depressing as Telltale going out of business during the final season, leaving Skybound Games to piece together the last 2 episodes. They kept that a secret from everyone until the last second. But back in season 1 of The Walking Dead, there was so much promise. Always with a tinge of impending doom, but you're being introduced to some fun characters that you can learn to enjoy the company of before they're inevitably turned into zombie chow. Season 1 does a lot to set up Lee and Clementine's relationship so that it can grow and develop through later seasons, so it comes as quite the narrative gamble when Lee is unavoidably bitten by a zombie. This franchise gives you a choice of outcomes in a lot of scenarios, but others, like Lee having a zombie chomp on his wrist, are locked in place and can't be affected. What you can decide is what happens to Lee, and whether you get Clementine to mercy kill him or leave him and let him turn, it doesn't change the fact that the protagonist of the first season of The Walking Dead isn't able to survive until season 2. So, no one's safe and anything goes. That is good to know. It can be very hard to avoid spoilers anymore. The internet has a very short half-life when it comes to what constitutes fair game with spoilers, which is always a massive concern whenever a big game comes out, rammed to the top with spoilerific plot twists, because you just know that you're one errant read of a random post away from having everything ruined for you. Despite this, I somehow got to play DokiDoki Literature Club blind around the peak of its popularity, with the only recommendation being that I had to play it. I'm not too big on visual novels, and DDLC didn't immediately seem all that appealing to me, but the promise of a sting in the tail kept me going. It does not take a genius to work out where the sting is. Do you like your charming dating simulator with a dose of sudden, unexpected suicide? Because I sure as shit don't. This messed me up for a little while, it really did, because while it was inevitable that DokiDoki Literature Club was gonna get a turning point where it transitions from a regular dating sim to a psychological mindfucky horror game, Sayori hanging herself was very low down on the list of what I thought was likely to cause it. It's not just lazy shock value either, because DDLC lays the groundwork for this through a previous conversation with Sayori, where she outlines her depression in frighteningly realistic detail, so maybe if you're cynical enough you could have seen this coming, but for the way it made me feel both at the time and the days after, this is one shocking moment that genuinely rocked me to my very core. Please don't do this to me again. Sayori's suicide acts as a catalyst for the game's more disturbing fourth wall breaks that come thick and fast throughout the rest of the game, but her death is so sudden and so surprising that the rest of DDLC can never get as shocking as that moment. Once you've shattered the thin veneer of a dating sim, everything falls apart to the extent that you can never go back. Turns out that Sayori's suicide ruins the game in more ways than one. Tragic protagonists never make it out of their games without losing something significant. Maybe it's the people around them or their code as a hero, or maybe they don't actually save the day at all, and you're left there wondering what the point of this adventure was, but whenever you can sense events conspiring against the protagonist, just know that things don't tend to work out in the end. Red Dead Redemption has the added handicap of being set in a period of time as ruthless and as lawless as the Wild West, where life was a bit unfair, but you just need to make the most of it and potentially give up that life of crime for the good of your family. If you can strike a deal with the government to help clear your name, that's even better, although you need to be careful just in case the FBI betray you and come after you. Even though you've done everything they've asked you. Oh no, it's happening. For the record, I never thought John Marston stood a chance of getting out of Red Dead Redemption alive, and especially not when the game tries to paint this idyllic picture of ranch life with the family. As if there wasn't one last skeleton in the closet or one last loose end that would come back to haunt Marston in the end, but at the very least I'm glad that RDR gave him a death that fitted his character. The FBI only want him, so Marston sends his family away to keep them safe before leaving the safety of the barn to face his death head on. And while the eventual outcome isn't all that shocking, this game still has one of the most three-dimensional protagonists in recent memory end the game as a bloodied corpse slumped on the floor. And that's shocking whichever way you shake it. Seeing him again in the prequel was enjoyable, but I couldn't help but think what Marston's future had in store for him. Predictable, but still surprising. How is it that a series like Danganronpa can have a reputation for surprises that keep on delivering? Surely if you play a game where characters die on the regular, you start to insulate yourself against any shocks, because like zombie games, everybody's cards are marked. Chances of survival are slim. By the time you reach Danganronpa V3, Killing Harmony, having played the previous two games, you'd be forgiven for thinking that you've seen it all and can accurately predict what's likely to happen, and which of these characters are up for the chop via creative executions. It's like paint by numbers but in dramatic video game form. There's nothing that Danganronpa V3 can do that can truly be considered surprising anymore. And I think the devs knew that. Which is why they showed their hand so early. All the marketing pushed protagonist Kaede Akamatsu to the front in an effort to hide the fact that, for the first time in this trilogy, the playable character won't be making it to the end of the game. In fact, the devs wanted to shake things up so much that Kaede is the first name on the chopping block, and the first victim to be executed in the game, leading to the protagonist dying inside the opening third of the story. It's a bit like Metal Gear Solid 2, where the main character at the start is swapped out for someone else, but at least Snake survived to return later in the game and wasn't pianoed to death. I remember talking about Kaede's death before and made it the thumbnail to that video, not knowing that Danganronpa hadn't been out for all that long. Hopefully I didn't spoil the surprise for too many people, because it's a hell of a twist. Maybe more protagonists need to die. I talk about Spec Ops The Line so much that I wonder if I even need a spoiler warning these days. I don't try to insert it in my videos where it doesn't belong though, it's just that there's so much to unpack that it often fits in with a variety of topics. It's a deliberately subversive video game that aims to mislead players to its true nature by being such a cookie-cutter experience until everything goes wrong. In that way, it's a bit like DokiDoki Literature Club, where there's hints at things being wrong, but you have to wait until the big earth-shattering plot twist before the game kicks into high gear. Spec Ops is a bit different since there are multiple different plot twists and a lot less anime girls, but you get no surprises for guessing the most important plot twist. Just be glad you don't get fire dumped on you instead. I've said this before, but the first time I got to the white phosphorus moment in Spec Ops The Line, I heard the voice clip about how the squad shouldn't be using white phosphorus, and so I left it alone and tried to push on without it. It's actually impossible to continue through conventional means since the enemy soldiers do too much damage and infinitely respawn, so you're funneled into taking the dodgy option and feeling the consequences of the decision that you were forced into taking. Spec Ops The Line has a lot to say about player choice and the aftermath of war, and while some of the messages end up a little bungled and heavy-handed, seeing for yourself the outcome of the white phosphorus strike with soldiers desperately clinging to life, before discovering all of the civilians that you had a hand in roasting, that is a powerful fucking scene. It's haunting, not only to the character of Captain Walker, but also the player themselves, and I remember getting control at the end of this scene and wondering what the point was in continuing. It's always someone else's fault. Thinking back to my old list all those years ago, there was one moment that I always regretted never talking about. I mean, I regretted putting something in the thumbnail that wasn't actually a main part of the video, but everyone does that on YouTube these days, so I don't feel too bad about it. But at the time of making that video in 2012, I had no experience of Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. I knew I was missing out because friends would tell me how much fun it was to build your character and choose how you wanted to experience the story, but I also knew there was a plot twist in there somewhere. I didn't know how good it was though. Shortly before the end of the game, you're given context to your character's backstory, which up until now starts and ends with you waking up at the start of the game. You basically link from The Legend of Zelda but with a lightsaber instead. Turns out that you are actually coming around after some brainwashing, because all this time you've been in control of Darth Revan, the big bad guy of this period of Star Wars history, whose apprentice is the main villain of the story. It's a perfect plot twist, since you're told just enough information by the people around you to keep the reveal hidden, until it's time for the right person in the right place to give you all the details that you need. There are plenty of games out there where you play as the bad guy, but not many make finding out your true identity this shocking and, crucially, this satisfying. If you want, you can resume your status as all-powerful Sith Lord and conquer the galaxy. Maybe I'll just do that. This is RabbidLuigi, and the Darth Revan twist is so good because of how surprisingly plausible it is. It's not every day that you're told that you've been brainwashed to think that you're not some kind of space tyrant, and KOTOR's player choice makes this an option that could be true. Any other game that tried this, it'll come off as incredibly unnecessary and cheesy, but in here, it is refreshing to find out that you are the biggest threat to the Star Wars universe. At least that was the case before Disney came along. If you've been affected by the shocking events of this video and need something you can put your trust in, then you might want to consider signing up for Squarespace, who have decades of experience with web design. If you've ever wondered what you need to do in order to have your own custom-built website to showcase your talents, then Squarespace have the knowledge and templates to help you on your way. They've got a wide range of designs to choose from and intuitive tools to help you build a website that you can be really proud of. I've been able to post a few reviews of recent games on there, and I think it's all coming together nicely over there thanks to my Squarespace membership. The best thing is that I can look up stuff that I'm not sure about and use their extensive library of video tutorials to help fill gaps in my knowledge, so I always feel like I'm learning new things to do with my site. So if you're ready to share your passion or just your opinion with the world with a service that is willing to help you every step of the way, head on over to squarespace.com for a 14-day free trial, and when you're ready to get going for real, go to squarespace.com/RabbidLuigi for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Share your talent with the world with Squarespace today.